We are live, yes, for the good fight right here on this Good Tuesday night, starting at 7 o'clock. And we are here. And look how the sun is coming through. I wasn't expecting that, but I'm not going to try to fix it. Usually I try to fix it. Not going to try to fix it. Thank you all so much for joining us for the good fight on tonight. I am excited about the conversation because I'm actually living into one of the ways that we talk about engaging every single week, and we are walking through a door tonight. And so I'm super excited about that. If this is your first time joining us for the good fight, let me say welcome, welcome, welcome. Want to greet you in the spirit of Sawubona. It is a Zulu tribal greeting, which means namaste. It means hello. It means that I am recognizing your existence, your presence in my space. But I'm not just recognizing your presence, I'm recognizing the whole of who you are. And I want you to know that in this space, you are seen. In this space, you are respected. In this space, you are embraced. And in this space, you are loved. In this space, we are one. So, Sawubona to you tonight. If this is your first time, there are ways that you can engage, but I want to make sure you know what you are engaging in or in what you are engaging. So the good fight is made possible by Just Talk Consulting, where we believe that if we want to realize a world that is more just, more equitable, more inclusive, and more peaceful, we must learn to live and love differently. And how do we do that? We do that by having strategic, effective, open, honest, transparent conversations that move us to action. And what is the action? That is whatever it takes to get us to collective liberation, where we are understanding the importance of centering those who are still being oppressed by systems of domination and exclusion and power. And we want to center them so that they can help lead the way to liberation, to freedom. And so we have these conversations at the intersection of faith and social justice. So how does your faith show up? How do you live your faith in a way that honors the spirit of oneness that binds us together through the Sawubona? And so that is why we're here. We call it the good fight because we are fighting the good fight. We are going to finish this race. We are going to keep our faith and our convictions and our beliefs that everyone deserves to be free. Everyone should be liberated. Everyone should be able to reach the height of their potential without any intentional barriers. Hey, Susanna. Yeah, I had the Susanna said, your face covered up. Yes, I wanted you all to see the logo so that you will know who makes it possible. Just Talk Consulting makes this conversation possible. I want to also let you know that if this is your first time, there are ways that you can engage with the conversation. One of the ways is to see yourself reflected in a mirror to something is said or done or read or shared in this space that resonates with you on a deep level, and you know what it feels like, and so you show up in that way. Another way that you can engage is to look through a window, so somebody else's experience is centered and you receive that experience as a gift. You listen actively, you offer yourself to the space so that a person will know. And when we say the person, we might be honoring the text, we might be honoring someone's comments, whatever that is, and you are receiving it as gift, and you have no responsibility other than that. You don't have to do any interrogations, any research, anything. Just say thank you. And then the third way that you can engage is to walk through a door, which is what we're doing tonight. So something happens in a previous conversation that we are still mulling over, we're still chewing on, we are still considering and thinking about, and it takes us on a different path. Starts with the same idea, same concept, but it leads us in a different way. Or a deeper way, a more critical way. And so that's what we'll be doing on tonight. And then finally, you can show up in the comments now, or even after the feed, if the broadcast is done, you can send your comments and I will receive them and we can talk it through even offline. So thank you for joining us. And so I want to talk about how we got here tonight, where we're walking through a door. Last week I was focusing on, or I was supposed to be focusing on, the danger of gender roles. So we were talking about Lot, Abraham's nephew, who ended up in a cave with his daughters, and the daughters seduced him, got him drunk, and then they both slept with him, had sex with him, and were impregnated. The older daughter, the younger daughter, not simultaneously, on consecutive nights, they slept with their father. And we began to talk about Lot. Arve wanted to know at the very end, wanted to know what happened to Lot, what else was going on with Lot. And I was saying to her that Lot is, that there's not much to say about him later on, except they really continue to tie him to his uncle, who is Abraham. And when we think about Christianity, when we think about Judaism, when we think about the Islamic faiths, we know that we usually say that we have the same, like we come from the same origin. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, all of us come from that foundation. And so we talk a lot about why aren't we able to be more present with each other in our oneness, understanding that our source and our root is the same. And there are lots of reasons for that. But this is this Abraham, Father Abraham, that we talk about when we're growing up. And I wanted to talk about, so Arve's question about Lot and what happened to him, and me bringing up Abraham, wanted me to continue to think about how we tell the stories in the Bible. And so the story is told in the Bible about Lot's daughter seducing him and getting him drunk and having sex with him. But there are other ways to interpret the text that I talked about a little bit, where it can show that Lot actually orchestrated the sexual assault on his daughters by bringing them to this cave where they were isolated from anyone else, and then feeding them this idea that there was no one else on the earth with whom they could procreate. And so that left them feeling like the world would come to an end if they did not take matters into their own hands. And so these were two different interpretations, both of which could be rooted in gender roles, because the idea that a woman cannot rape a man is rooted in a gender role. We think that women can only function a certain way. So I wanted to push us to think about women as being human, and that to harm someone, to be harmed by someone, I want to say is part of is we can attribute that to human behavior. That people, whoever you are, whatever race you are, whatever gender you are, whatever your sexual orientation, it does not matter. That human behavior will allow for the evils that we see perpetrated by humans. It doesn't matter. We don't want to put people in a box and assume that this type of person cannot harm us, because all of us are capable of causing harm. We do not have to act on it, but we are all capable. And so lifting women out of this box to say, oh no, I cannot be raped by a woman, was important, so that we would make sure that we can see men, because there are men and boys and women who have been raped by women. And when we assume that women cannot act in that way, we do not allow for their stories. We do not make room for their lived experiences. And we continue to perpetuate trauma and stigma around what it is that they have gone through. So that was an important part of the conversation. And so when we talked about, when Arve was asking the question, and we talked about it from a different perspective, where here is Lot, and he is the one who's orchestrating the sexual assault on his own daughters, and not even dealing with the incest piece of it, but just talking about this idea that we live in rape culture. And so we are not surprised when a man thinks that he can control another woman's body. And in fact, we make a lot of concessions for them. Even within the law, we have these cases where men will say, after a young man or an older man has been found guilty of sexual assault, of rape, sexual harassment, we want to be careful with their lives because we don't want to ruin things for them, not giving any consideration to the person who was targeted as a victim of this account. And so we want to protect them. We want to protect the man, because it's the role of the man to be the head and the leader. And we want to make sure that he's able to function in those capacities. And so we're willing to forgive so much of what he does, but even if it's harm and trauma towards towards another body, and in most cases it's toward a woman's body, but men rape men just as well as women rape men. So we don't want to again get caught up in the gender roles. And so thinking about it from both perspective, and then asking ourselves the question, right? Do we have to decide which perspective is right? Interpretation. Do we have to decide which interpretation is right? Did the daughters actually rape Lot, or did Lot orchestrate um, the sexual molestation of his own daughters? Like, do we have to decide that one is right and one is wrong? Is it possible that both of them can be right and we can hold both of them together at the same time? And that interpretation is just that. It allows us the freedom to read and experience the text based on what we understand better, what actually fits into our way of thinking and knowing and being, and to offer it up for consideration. And you can say yes to it, you can say no to it, you can say maybe to it, you can come back to it years later. But the point is, you are open to the idea that these interpretations exist. And if we are open to the ideas that these interpretations exist, then we are not so easily roped into this idea that there's only one way that you can read the Bible, because many of us are suffering from those kinds of teachings that we've been sitting under for all of our lives, where this is the way that things are because this is what the pastor said. And if you dare ask a question, now something's wrong with you because you must not question God. But giving God the freedom to respond to us based on our understanding of what's happening with the text, allow us to engage with the text, allow us to disagree with the text, allow us to interrogate the text, allow us to try it on and come back to it and leave. Like, that allows for a more real and human experience with God through what we call the Bible. And so allowing us to think on a different level, think broader, think more deeply, think more critically, frees us all, especially God. And so I was thinking about this conversation about the way it's possible that Lot could have orchestrated the sexual molestation of his daughters. And then I said, well, I wanted to just talk about how I was linking Abraham and Lot because they are uncle and nephew. And so it made me think about Abraham. Because a lot of the times when if we want to talk about Lot being the one who sexually assaults his daughters, if we want to talk about it in that way, then a lot of times when people perpetuate negative and evil and harmful and traumatic behavior, many times part of the story is that they may have experienced it themselves, or they may have seen it, or both. And so I began to think about that with Lot, like, where, if it's true that you behaved this way with your own daughters, where have you seen this happen before? Have you been witness to this? Have you been a part of this? Is this a part of your bloodline, right? Is this something that you're carrying in your cells, this trauma that you've seen perpetuated by folks that you know, that you can touch, that have trained you, that have conditioned you, that have programmed you to believe that this behavior is okay, or it is necessary, or it is acceptable, or it is absolvable, right? Like, I can get away with it. And so when we begin to think about Abraham, then that brings up the story of Hagar. So Abraham, before his name was Abraham, his name was Abram, and he had a wife whose name we know as Sarah, but initially it was Sarai. And Abram and Sarai were married, and Sarai had a slave, and the slave's name is Hagar. So you got Abram, Sarai, and Hagar. So these are the three characters in this story. When we begin to talk about gender roles and what happens to women, the gender role that we put men in gives them permission to, gives them we better understand the story when the man is the perpetrator. Because when we think about power resting in the hands of men during as a result of patriarchy, so for a man to be abusive, for a man to exert power in a way that is harmful and traumatic and that is violent, then we have a better understanding of that because we've given them that role. And so we would expect whatever happens to Hagar to be done at the hands of Abram. And so what happens to Hagar? Hagar basically ends up getting raped by Abram, and then and she has a child. She has Abram's first son, whose name is Ishmael, Ishmael. Some people, depending on your pronunciation, before we get the golden child that we know of as Isaac. And so we have this story. And so when people think about Hagar having this baby, sometimes and many times they do not talk about her being raped, and that is interpretation, it is indoctrination, it is all of those things. So let's ask ourselves some questions as we engage with the text on tonight, thinking about Lot in the background. Like, where have you seen this behavior before, Lot? Have you seen the behavior in which women's bodies are traumatized? And it's okay, it's acceptable. There's not a lot of accountability for it because we don't see any, we didn't see any accountability for Lot's behavior last week. And so where is the accountability? Is there even any accountability? So let's talk to the text tonight and see what happens. And so I want to bring in Genesis chapter 16, verses 1 through 6. And this is the story of Abram, Hagar, and Sarah. I said this is the story, but we're only reading the first 6 verses. So there's lots more to the story, but I just want to give us this introduction so that we can begin to ask some questions and interrogate the text and see what comes up with us, see what comes up in us as we are still thinking about gender roles and the danger of them, especially when they are rooted in the biblical teaching. So here's Genesis chapter 16, verses 1 through 6. I'll read them and then I will pause for just a moment so that we can Selah, Selah. Pause and just calmly think about what it is that we have read, and then we'll go on and talk about it. So here's Genesis chapter 16, verses 1 through 6, Hagar and Ishmael. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. So she said to Abram, "The Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her." Abram agreed to what Sarai said. So after Abram had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarai, his wife, took her Egyptian slave Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife. He slept with Hagar and she conceived. When she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. Then Sarai said to Abram, "You are responsible for the wrong I am suffering. I put my slave in your arms, and now that she knows she is pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me." "Your slave is in your hands," Abram said. "Do with her whatever you think best." Then Sarai mistreated Hagar, so she fled from her. So here's the introduction to the story where we've got the 3 characters of Abram, Sarai, and Hagar. And Sarah is concerned because she has not been able to have children. And she believes that it is important for her family line to continue. And even though she's not able to have children, she can have them through her slave. Because through her slave, the children become her property. The slave is her property. And so the children now become her property. So she's able to say, "These children belong to me. This property is mine. So these are my children." And we can just dismiss Hagar and continue with the descendants in my family. And so, a couple of questions that I wanted us to think about in terms of gender roles and the way that we have constructed these stories around gender roles is first to think about all of what we see in the world, all even when we think about the history of who we are as a country, that includes a system of enslavement. So, you're talking about Sarah, you're talking about her slave. You think about America, we have humans who were enslaved. So when we think about the history of who we are as America, which includes this system of slavery, and you say, wait a minute, in the Bible, there were slaves, you say, yes. So where do these ideas come from that we have? The way that we are living now, the way that we have lived, the way that we are working towards living together in the future, where do these imaginations come from? Who told us that it was okay to own humans? Well, we could source it in the Bible because we're sitting here looking at a text that said Sarah had a slave whose name was Hagar. Oh, here's Ave's question. What's the importance of Hagar being named when most women in the Bible remain unnamed? Here's the question again. What's the importance of Hagar being named when most women in the Bible remain unnamed? I want to say that one of the reasons why I think it's important for Hagar to be named is because of who her child is, right? So Hagar has Ishmael, and Sarah, she'll become Sarah by the time she has Isaac. These are like prominent children in the Bible who are descendants of Abraham. And so when we begin to think about Father Abraham, and who had many sons, right? And when we begin to think about it, I think that it was important for us to know the role that Hagar is playing, because Ishmael has his own nation of people. So even though we don't talk about Ishmael, he is the firstborn son to Abraham. And because of Abraham's importance, I think that's why they might have named Hagar, because they're linked. She's linked to him forever and ever and always. I know that they don't always do that with all women, but the ones that I do think are named, I'm trying to think of one that is not named who gave birth to a prominent man's child. Because we know Bathsheba's name, she gave birth to David's son. We know Ruth's name, who gave birth to the child through Boaz, who's also in the line of David. Yeah, so I really think it has to do with who the father is in this case. I think that might be one of the reasons. I don't know, there might be other reasons, but I think that that's one of the reasons why it's important to name Hagar. I also think that it's important to name Hagar because she is the one who names God. Hagar, if we go later on into this story in Genesis chapter 16, she will call God El Roi, ROI, and it's the God who sees me. And so that's huge she's the first person in the entire Bible to name God the God who sees me. And so I think that may also be a reason why she has a name, because of her, because of this gift that she's been given to name God. And she does name God, the one who sees me. So those are just a couple of ideas that I can come up with as to the why we know Hagar's name. And so we have this story with Hagar, Sarai, and Abram. And when we think about the system of enslavement and the way that we tell the story, even now, when we think about it historically, all across the globe, but particularly here in the United States, we make it seem like it's white men who own property, the property of slaves, who have all of the power. And they are the powerful ones, and they are the ones who end up writing our legislation. They are the ones who shape this country. They are the ones who become the writers of the Constitution. So everything rests in their hands. But the fact of the matter is we've got them boxed into a gender role even now, because it's not true in this case right here and right now, when we're talking about Hagar, Sarai, and Abram, this was Sarai's slave. Hagar belonged to Sarai. Remember, Abram says, that's your slave. You can do whatever you want. And so when we began to do some research into the history of our country and dealing with the system of enslavement, there are plenty of white women who had slaves that were their property, separate from the property of slaves that their husbands owned. And so they had power through the system of enslavement, and we simply don't talk about it as much as we should. So when we think about George Washington, who was the president, he had a wife, and when he got married to his wife in Virginia, he had like 8 slaves, or 18, 8. I want to say 8. It could have been 18, but she had like 84. And so growing up during that time, this is like in the 1700s. So growing up during that time, people who owned slaves, if you were parents who owned slaves and you had children, you would give your children slaves, not slaves. We should not call people slaves. We should call people humans who were enslaved, people who were enslaved. We should talk about it in that way, right? Because they were not slaves. They were people, they were humans who were enslaved. And so the enslavers would give their children humans to own, in the same way that they would be passing down land. They were more prone to give their children humans to own than they were to give them land. And so this property makes them rich. This property makes them wealthy. And it was happening to women. White women were playing an integral role in the system of enslavement by owning humans as property, by being violent with them, by hunting them down, or making sure that they get returned when they run away. And so Sarai is like a precursor to what we see in our own history, if we are willing to hear it, if we are willing to search for it, if we are willing to read it, if we are willing to digest it and think about what it really means for us, even now as we seek liberation. So this person who has been enslaved, whose name is Hagar, belongs to Sarai. And thinking about the gender roles that restrict women, Sarah is concerned because they've been living in Canaan for 10 years and she has not had a baby. And so there's so much stigma and discrimination attached to not having a baby that Sarah is figuring out, I got to have a baby some kind of way. It's the same conversation we were having with Lot's daughters last week. We cannot afford to not procreate. We've got to make sure that we have a baby. Like, it's our duty, it's our responsibility. This is how the world goes on. If not, oh my goodness, woe be unto us. The Lord said, be fruitful and multiply. We are sinners if we do not. So what has to happen? We've got to sleep with our father. And over here with Sarah, she says, I'm going to give you my person that I own, my human that I own, that I am enslaving. I want you to take her and I want you to have sex with her. So she instructs Abram as to what to do with her slave. And so the gender role says, no, it's the man that's the head. It's the man that's no. Abram is taking instruction from his wife, Sarah, when she says, I want you to sleep with with the human that I am enslaving. And that's what I expect you to do. And so Abram agrees. Now, it's interesting the way the Bible words this, because it says then that Sarai gives Hagar to Abram as his wife. And so my question to us tonight is, how does one become a wife? Seems to me that you enter into a relationship willingly. That would be the first step. And that you journey in this relationship that's filled with all the ups and downs and joys and concerns and happiness and sorrows, the happy times, the bad times, the good times. All of this is a journey of relationship until you get to the point that you say, I want to give myself over to this person. I want to commit my life to this person. I want us to be together according to tradition until death do us part. Those people that I marry nowadays, I do not use the traditional vows at all. Either they write their own vows or I will write their vows for them, but we do not say till death do us part. What we say is for as long as the journey, as long as your body say yes to the journey. So here's Susanna saying, so that would have been polygamy. Absolutely. It's so interesting to me in this day and age when we begin to talk about people who are polyamorous, right? We talk about people who have many loves. And the first thing that pops up for folks is, oh, so you having sex with more than one person? Like, that's a sin. Oh my goodness. And like, but again, the overarching question is, where do these imaginations that we have come from? There is a scripture, a verse in the Bible that says, it's in Ecclesiastes, I want to say it's chapter 3, that there's nothing new under the sun. We are not making up anything in this world. Whatever it is that we're going through, it has already been done before. So polygamy has happened. People having more than one love, absolutely. More than one wife, absolutely. More than one lover, absolutely. It has happened in the Bible. So this is absolutely polygamy, and it was not something that was frowned upon. Here is the wife saying to her husband, take another wife. So he's like, okay, it's interesting. Yeah. So this is absolutely polygamy. But my question though is, can we really classify Hagar as a wife? If somebody says, here, take this woman, and Abraham says, okay, and we have not heard one word from Hagar. Hagar has not said, oh, yes, I would like to be in relationship with Abram. Hagar has not said, oh, yes, Sarah, thank you for asking me how I feel about entering into this union. So to have this, to be a part of this polygamous union, thank you for engaging me and for thinking about what I know. And so how is it, Arve? We can ask this question. You give her a name, but you don't let her talk. She got a name, but she's silenced. So is she really, can we really call her a wife if she has not consented to being in relationship with Abram? According to the text, Sarah says here, Abram says, okay, he has sex with her, she gets pregnant. The Bible says, what we just read, says that once Hagar realized what happened, so you gave me to your husband so I could have a baby? So now I'm pregnant? Once she realizes this, now Hagar is pissed. Like, what? So you all have gotten together. Well, actually, you, Sarah, in your own mind, have gotten together in you yourself and you, me, myself, and I. We know we talk like that. You've gotten together in your own mind and you have considered your own life and you have decided that you are living in a deficit and you want to change something about your life. And so you control my body to make your life better, to make you feel better, to get your descendants. For whatever reason, you are making decisions about my body without my permission. What does that sound like, even as we sit here in this day and age, 2023, where we've got people who are making decisions about our bodies without our permission? You telling me as a parent what I can do with my child, how I can help guide my own child's body. You don't get to make that decision for my body. And so Hagar's like, wait a minute, what is happening? This is my body and you've made this decision for me and now I got a child. And so when she gets upset because she realizes what has happened to her body without her permission, she feels some kind of way. And clearly through what the Bible says, through the text that we just read, she made it known because Sarai says to Abram, now she despises me. So it must be some tension in the air. It must be something happening with these two grown women in the same household, because now Sarah says, oh my goodness, now she mad at me. I blame you. Wait, what now? What? Sarah, you created this. You decided to make you made a decision about Hagar's body without her permission, gave it to gave it to Abram. Abram impregnates her, which is what you wanted. And you mad because she don't appreciate, because Hagar doesn't appreciate how you mishandled her body? Reminds me of those of us who raise up whenever we see discrimination or injustice. We raise our voices, we use our signs, we write letters, we march in the street, we get our bullhorns, we push for legislation, we push to have legislation removed. We do all of this work, and then people mad at us. How dare you raise your voice in protest to injustice? And that's what Sarai does. She says to Hagar, to Abram, look, how's she gonna, she don't get to despise me. You need to do something about it. And Abram says, I'm not doing anything. That ain't my slave. That is not the person. I don't own that person. You own her. That's your property. And because it's your property, you can do whatever you want. And so this idea that it's only white men who have all the power, who have had all the power because they were the ones who were owning humans, because they were the ones who were allowed, is simply not true. It's not true now, and it wasn't true then. Just like there were white women who had who owned humans, there was a woman in the Bible who owned a human. And so she could do whatever she wanted to do, and that's what she did. So the Bible says, according to the text, that then she began to mistreat Hagar. My property, I do whatever I want to do. My treatment of her has been sanctioned by the man in the home. Let's think about that for a moment. My treatment of the one that I consider to be mine has been sanctioned by the other person, because it doesn't have to be a man, the other person, the other adult in the home. I think about children right now. So many of us have this idea that children belong to us. I think Bill Cosby is one of the ones who has famously perpetuated this idea, because he used to say all the time on the show, I brought you into this world, I can take you out. As if you are the one who determines the destiny of the child. This ain't your, you don't own this, you don't own this child. You don't have a right to determine whether or not the child lives or dies. That's not your role in the child's life. That's not why you've been named parents. And so we see abuse happening to children at home. We see it as mothers, as lovers, as spouses, as partners. We see the abuse. And even if we don't say anything about it, then our silence is complicity. And so now we've sanctioned the violence. Abram ain't said nothing. The Bible declares that Sarah mistreated Hagar. Abram hasn't taken up for her yet, and yet she's carrying his child. Hasn't advocated, activated, irritated, agitated, nothing for her. So now what is Hagar to do? She's in this home where she's being owned by one, she's being sexually assaulted, she's being raped by another. Now she's with child. What in the world? Think about these conditions. Think about that kind of trauma that she's living with day in and day out. What resources does she have? It's not like they had transportation at the time. Where's she gonna go? Who gonna help her? How's she gonna get there? So she feels, I can only imagine what she feels, but helpless and hopeless and unseen, invisible. If you owned by one and raped by the other, and now you with child with no resources and no community support, I could see how she would feel unseen and invisible. So Hagar decides to do what I think is justifiable, makes sense to me. She runs away. She leaves. She flees. She escapes. And this is where I get I have the dog moment. Well, I've had dog moments all along the way, right? Like it's the woman who owns the human while we always acting like it's the man. It is the woman who gives the human that she owns to the husband, says, hey, now make this your wife, go on and sleep with her. These are defying all the gender roles that we have come to understand. So I've had a lot of dog moments, but this one I think is the one that troubled me the most. So Hagar leaves because she cannot take it. She's being mistreated by the woman who sanctioned, who orchestrated her rape. And that is another thing that white women in the history of America, those who owned humans, that's what they would do. They would either sanction the rape of Black women so that their husbands, they knew what their husbands were doing, or they would orchestrate the rape of a Black woman by a Black man, both of whom were owned by the woman because they wanted to have more children, because they wanted to continue to perpetuate the system of slavery. And so again, these ideas, these behaviors that we have are not new. That's exactly what Sarah did. She orchestrated the rape of Hagar. Hagar escapes. She runs away. She is an enslaved person looking for freedom, looking for liberation. She runs away, and she's sitting by this on this rock in this desert near a road. I want to say it's called Shur, Shur. And according to the text in chapter 16, the Lord finds her. I think it's interesting to use the word find, because it says she ran away. But for me, I don't believe she ran away. I believe she escaped. Because if she escaped, that means she's trying not to be found. So for the Lord to find her, you got to go looking, because she hid. She ducking and dodging. She in and out. She hiding. It's almost like she's looking for an underground railroad. Where's my next stop? So I can get some water, so I can get something. But in Hagar's case, there is no water. She is about to die of thirst, which also means that her child is, that's later. That's later. Don't let me get ahead of myself. But Hagar runs away. She escapes. The Lord finds her. And the Lord says to her two things that I want to make sure I say out loud. The Lord gives her two directives. Number one, go back. Number two, submit. That's what the Lord said. Go back and submit. Wait, what now? Listen. Remember I said I want us to interrogate the text, meaning we want to ask the text some questions. And ask ourselves some questions based on the text that we read. The Lord says, go back and submit to your mistress, to Sarah. Go back and submit. So my question that I started writing, I want to write an article about it, but I got distracted. And so maybe I'll finish it tonight. I always say I'm going to write and I never do. I gotta do better. What happens when the Lord names you slave? The Lord names Hagar. You are Hagar. I should pull this up now that I think about it. I should pull this up. So this is, oh wait. Yeah. No. Genesis 16. I'm gonna pull it up for us so that I'm not just telling you this story, but you can see it for yourself. And I was using the New International Version, so let's just stick with that. We've got we'll pick right up here. We'll pick right up here at verse 7, because I read verses 1 through 6. So let's pick up right here at verse 7 and see what happens. Let's do that. Okay. I got it right here. I'm getting ready to pull it up because I want you to see it for yourself, so that you are not just depending on me. So this is after Sarai realizes that Hagar feels some kind of way about being impregnated by Abram at the instruction at the hands. This was orchestrated by Sarai. Sarai is like, how dare you get mad at me for abusing your body? I just can't, you can't make it up. How dare you get mad at me for orchestrating your rape? You making me, oh, so I tell you what, I'm gonna treat you however I want to treat you, as if she wasn't already doing that. So she mistreats her. Like, what more can you do? It had to be awful. And so then Hagar runs away. She escapes, and then she is found. So here it is, verses 7 through I think 13. It says, the angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was the spring that is beside the road to Shur. And he said, Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going? I'm running away from my mistress Sarai, she answered. Then the angel of the Lord told her, go back to your mistress and submit to her. The angel added, I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count. I want to stop right there. Okay. This is the angel of the Lord. So some people are like, well, it's not the Lord, it's an angel of the Lord. Okay. We can call the angel of the Lord, which would just be interesting to me because we put everything else in the Lord's mouth, right? So it's not when Paul says something, we don't say Paul said it. We like the Lord said it. Paul is the one who wrote it, but we say it's God's word, right? Came out of God's mouth. So if you want to say it's the angel of the Lord, that's fine. If you want to say it's the Lord because the angel is a messenger of the Lord, I don't want to get bogged down in that. But here is a message from the Lord. This is God speaking through this angel. It says, Hagar, slave. Like, what happens? My question to us. What happens when God names you slave? What you do with it? And so he says, okay, you're a slave. This is what I want you to do. Two things. Go back and submit. Now, Hagar is running for her life and the life of her child. I am in a home where I'm owned by one person, I'm raped by another, I've got a child to care for, and you telling me that this was a bad decision? That I need to go back and submit? But okay, so that's, remember I said that was problematic dog moment. And on top of that, the angel of the Lord, that I'm calling the Lord, says, and if you do, I'll bless you. I can't help but think about how many of us right now are living with injustice. Like, it's happening to our bodies, not Hagar's body, our bodies right now. And we are silenced because we'd rather have the blessing. Child, I live in this big old house. I don't care what they do to me on my job. I can't lose my house, my car, my red bottoms, my Michael Kors. Y'all, I don't know. Gucci. What are people into these days? Louis Vuitton. I'm not into it, so I don't know, but I feel like I should know. I know people be wearing them red bottoms, Louboutins, like whatever it is, whatever this materialistic thing is that I consider to be a blessing. I want to hold on to it so tight that I'm willing to submit. I'm willing to go back. I'm willing to be silenced because the Lord gonna bless me if I do. I have got to finish writing my book, y'all. The title of my book is You Can Have My Blessings. That's the title of my book. I cannot finish it. I can't finish it. I can't finish it, and I will. Because if this is the way that we're supposed to be blessed in the name of God, It's to go back to a situation where I'm being owned by one person and raped by another person and I'm with child. How does this work out? You mean to tell me that the Lord can't bless me on my way? You mean to tell me the Lord cannot fix it so that I go somewhere else and become the mother of Ishmael, who has all of these descendants and becomes a mighty nation? The only way I can be blessed is if I go back and submit. What kind of God does that? And so here's where why I think people want to not say it's the Lord, so you can give God an out. God didn't say that. The angel said that. The Lord said, that's not the same person, really. Oh, that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna play these theological calisthenics, because I can point to all these other places in the Bible where somebody says something, writes it down, and you say, oh, that's God. When Paul says homosexuality is a sin, you say that's God. When Paul says women shouldn't talk in the church, you say that women can't preach in the pulpit because that's God. But now this ain't God. Oh yeah, it's God. What do we do with that? I was having a conversation with a friend earlier who was in some distress, and she said that she wasn't questioning God, like, I don't believe God exists. Like, that's not what she was saying. But she was saying, you can't make me understand this. Help me understand this. What is God doing? Why would I'm already going through, and I've been going through, and every time I think that I'm out of the woods, something else happens. How did she say it? She said, like, I got cut. I can't remember exactly what she said, but her point was, so my arm got cut, and then I got an infection, and because I got an infection, I had to get it amputated. And once I got it amputated, then I had to get a prosthesis, but then I couldn't get the prosthesis. Like, so it was just this building up. And so she was asking questions. The question to God was, how long? How much do I have to suffer before you decide to come see about me? And so we have Hagar. It's after this. I want to go back to this that we say. Okay, I want to go back to this. Let's start at verse 11. Pick up again. The angel of the Lord said to her, you are now pregnant, and you will give birth to a son. You shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery. He will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him, and he will live in hostility toward all his brothers. Now this the blessing. This the blessing. She gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. You are the God who sees me. For she said, I have now seen the one who sees me. That is why the well shall be called Bir Lahai Roy. I wish I could say that in Hebrew. It is still there between Kadesh and Bered. So the Lord says, if you go back and submit, I'll bless you. You're going to have a son. You're going to name him Ishmael. He's going to be a wild donkey of a man. His hand going to be against everybody, and everybody's hand going to be against his. Going to have nothing but enemies all his life. And she says, oh, my goodness, you are the God who sees me. I didn't come to make that make sense. I came to walk through a door that Arve opened by asking what happened to Lot. And I wanted to know, what happened to you, Lot? What happened if it's true that you actually orchestrated the incest between your daughters, because you brought them up into this cave where they didn't have any business being alone with you? Is this some behavior that you have seen before? And when we hear people talk about you lots later on, they tie you to Abraham. And so because they tie you to Abraham, I want to know about this Abraham. What do we know about Abraham? In this story, we can call him a rapist. So to harm women's bodies for your own purpose and will is something that you could be familiar with. No, it depends on whether or not you receive the interpretation. And so we are talking about this behavior that's happening at the hands of men, and we live in rape culture, so it happens all the time. But we needed the other interpretation of the story to lift women out of this label that says you can't harm another person's body, that you through rape, that you cannot sexually assault somebody. Yes, you can, even if you are orchestrating it like Sarah did. And I was wondering, could we charge Sarah with rape? I was trying to look it up and I couldn't find where we could. She orchestrated it, yes. So maybe we could call her an accessory to rape. What do you call the other? What's the other word when you collude with the person? You know what I'm talking about. As many crime shows as I watch is on the tip of my tongue. But yes, you are accountable, woman. You must be held accountable for the rape of this other woman. Let me see this. Accomplice, yes. Any accessory, yes. All of that. So we needed to have that conversation to lift us out of these molds to think, because even when we think about our own history, we cannot pretend like it was only white men who were owning humans. White women were doing that too. Part of the violence, watching it unfold, sanctioning it, wielding this kind of power over Black bodies. The same way that Sarah is wielding this power over this Black body. Because Hagar ain't white. These people not white. And in the midst of all of this, when God does show up, God names Sarah, Hagar slave, which means to me, you're like, I'm okay with this being your situation. I'm so okay with it that I want you to go back to it. I want you to go back. I want you to submit, but I'm going to bless you if you do. I'm going to bless you with a son that's going to be wild as a donkey. Who want a son as wild as a donkey? Is that a blessing? Maybe I'm looking at it wrong, but I wouldn't think that's a blessing. So his hand is going to be against everybody. Everybody's hand's he going to just have enemies. He's going to be fighting his whole life. You know what does that to you? Trauma. This baby born into trauma. We look at children when they are in school and they're fighting or they're acting out, and we say things like, "What's wrong with you?" That means that we don't have as much socially emotional intelligence as we need. Because when we see children acting out, even when we see adults acting in ways that don't fit the circumstances, the question is not what's wrong with you. The question is what happened to you. I can see how Ishmael, just based on the very pronouncement over his life, you're born into trauma. And so, yes, you are having difficulty with your behavior. And then if you have an even more, an even higher level of social emotional intelligence, not only do you ask the question, what happened to you? You ask the question, what happened to your people? Baby, what happened to your mom? Because surely the trauma that Hagar experiences being owned by one person who orchestrates her rape by the other person is going to manifest in her child's life in some way. That's why we deal with adverse childhood experiences now, because many of us can check one of those boxes. Did this happen to you? This happened to you? This happened to you? In many cases, it's because of the environment that you are in that's filled with trauma, because the person who is curating the environment is traumatized. And so I wanted us to just ask a whole bunch of questions. Just interrogate the text. You don't have to come to an agreement. You don't have to draw any conclusions. You don't have to agree with it. Let's just engage it and see what happens in our body and bubbles up. So I'm hoping that you'll be thinking about this some more. I'm going to be thinking about it some more because I told you I'm going to try to finish writing this article. The article is, right now, the name of it is, What Do You Do When God Names You Slave? I know that's a long title, so I'm going to have to workshop it. But this is heavy on me right now. From Lot, his daughters, getting him drunk, and engaging in an incestuous relationship? Or did he orchestrate the molestation of his daughters because he knows what it's like to witness or to be aware of trauma against women's bodies at the hands of both women and men? So it's something he grew up with. One of the things that they talked about with the women in our culture, in our history, the white women who had slaves, is that you learned how to live on a plantation as a child. You learned how to exact violence on the bodies of the people who were enslaved. You were taught how to whip them. And you were taught because you were given children like gifts. I mean, you were given humans as gifts, and you could do whatever you want. They would teach you how to whip them. And no matter how big or small the children were, you would whip them until you drew blood. Children were taught that. Mercy, mercy me. It's time for me to go, but I feel like I can't until we breathe, y'all. Let's take a deep breath in through our nose like we're smelling a rose. It looks like this. And then we're going to breathe out with our mouths open, making a sound like this. So one breath is, let's breathe together before we go. Let's breathe in and exhale. Thank you for joining us for The Good Fight. We'll be right back here on next Tuesday, 7 o'clock CST, live on Facebook. I hope to see you then. Bye-bye. Don't stop breathing.